So think about the fundamental architecture of a modern commercial bank for a second.
Okay, yeah.
You probably picture, the towering glass headquarters in some big financial district, the quarterly shareholder meetings, the risk mitigation algorithms running 24/7 in the background.
Right, the whole corporate machinery.
Exactly. And that entire machinery, from the ground up, is engineered for one singular overriding purpose, which is maximizing return on investment. The system naturally gravitates toward high net worth individuals and massive corporate clients because, well, that's where the margins are.
No, that's standard banking gravity.
Right. But now I want you to mentally invert that entire model. Just flip it. Picture an institution where generating profit is actively, legally deprioritized.
Wow, okay.
A bank where the target demographic is inherently the most high-risk, lowest-yield population imaginable. We're talking people with zero collateral, living in deeply remote mountainous regions. It just completely defies standard economic logic.
It absolutely does. I mean, an institution operating under those parameters sounds like a theoretical exercise from some progressive macroeconomics seminar, right? Not a functioning reality.
Yeah.
Because we are so deeply conditioned to view banking through this very rigid lens of interest margins, credit scores, and shareholder value. The very concept of a financial entity that actively seeks out the most vulnerable clients and actually measures its ultimate success by its impact on national social equity rather than its balance sheet, I mean, that completely upends the conventional framework of global finance.
But the crazy part is, it isn't a theoretical exercise at all.
Yeah.
It's a very real, incredibly massive institution that processes billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And today, for this deep dive, we are decoding Vietnam's decision on a Wolf 5 QD TTG,
Right.
which is it's a prime ministerial directive issued in January 2023. And it essentially serves as the master blueprint, the strategic roadmap for the Vietnam Bank for Social Policies, or the VBSP. And it plots out their trajectory all the way through the year 2030. So we're looking at this roughly 12-page decree that engineers a comprehensive financial safety net for our nation's most marginalized citizens.
And, taking the time to actually analyze a state-driven social policy bank provides a truly fascinating contrast to our current, very algorithmic financial climate.
Totally.
We are looking at a system that attempts to blend strict macroeconomic policy with highly localized grassroots community organization. It really forces us to ask how you actually execute high-risk lending at scale without collapsing the entire institution.
Yeah, and the document starts with a very clear foundational viewpoint. It states explicitly that social policy credit isn't viewed as a temporary charity mechanism or some localized handout. The state frames it as a permanent, critical lever for long-term economic growth, one that has to run in parallel with social justice initiatives.
Right, it's baked into the economic strategy itself.
Exactly. But the immediate structural choice they outline in the text is what really caught my attention. The directive mandates the centralization of all social policy credit. It pulls it away from the broader banking sector and consolidates it exclusively within the VBSP.
Yeah, the precise language they use focuses on maintaining and promoting the effectiveness of a, quote, specific social policy credit management model. So they are very intentionally isolating the social mandate from the commercial mandate.
But wait, why build a parallel banking universe from scratch? I mean, in a lot of Western systems, like with the Community Reinvestment Act in the U.S., for example, governments usually just implement regulations that force existing commercial banks to hit a specific quota for low-income lending.
True, that's the standard approach.
Right. So creating an entirely autonomous parallel banking ecosystem just for social policy seems like a massive, unnecessary logistical headache. Why not just mandate that the commercial sector handle it?
Well, because forcing commercial entities to act against their own fiduciary duty creates this deep structural friction. Commercial markets inherently fail to serve high-risk, low-income populations because the fundamental profit incentive simply does not exist.
Right. There's no money to be made there.
Exactly. Think about it. A commercial loan officer is trained to evaluate risk based on verifiable cash flow and liquid collateral. A subsistence farmer in a rural province has neither of those things. So if you force a commercial bank to lend to that farmer, the bank is basically going to do one of two things.
Oh, sure.
They will either expend massive legal resources finding regulatory loopholes to avoid the mandate entirely, or they will underwrite the loan so poorly that the borrower inevitably defaults.
Because the commercial bank secretly wants the social program to fail so they can just get back to their core business of corporate lending. It's an annoying compliance hurdle for them, not a genuine mission.
Precisely. Or, more charitably, they just lack the highly specialized infrastructure required to support that specific type of rural, low-income borrower. It creates a massive conflict of interest within the institution's DNA.
That makes sense.
So by centralizing this mandate in the VBSP, the state systematically removes that conflict. The VBSP never has to worry about competing with private banks for lucrative mortgage contracts or appeasing shareholders with dividend payouts. The state can channel its resources into an entity that is purpose-built from the ground up to solve one specific socioeconomic equation.
Okay, so let's look at the operational targets they set for this purpose-built machine, because the KPIs for 2030 are incredibly aggressive. The directive mandates that 100% of eligible poor beneficiaries who have a demand and meet the conditions must have access to VBSP products and services.
100% total saturation.
Total saturation.
Which is wild.
Attaining total geographic and demographic saturation in a country with complex mountainous terrain and incredibly diverse ethnic minority populations is an immense logistical undertaking. Yeah, I can't even imagine.
It requires a physical footprint that commercial banks would consider completely financially ruinous to maintain.
And they aren't just trying to maintain their current size either. They are targeting an average annual credit growth of roughly 10%.
Which is huge.
Right. Compounding a 10% growth rate year over year until 2030 implies a massive expansion in the sheer volume of capital they are deploying. But as you read further into the targets, there is one specific metric that demands intense scrutiny. The directive sets the target for overdue debt at below 2% of total outstanding debt.
Yeah. That figure right there represents a massive anomaly when viewed through standard financial risk modeling.
Hold on, I really need to pause on the math here because it completely defies traditional underwriting logic. We are talking about predominantly unsecured loans distributed to the absolute poorest households, often for agricultural projects that are highly vulnerable to unpredictable variables.
Like weather, livestock disease, things like that.
Exactly. So expecting a sub 2% default rate from a borrower pool with virtually zero collateral feels like asking a high school track team to routinely break Olympic world records. To put it in perspective, the U.S. subprime mortgage market blew up the global economy with default rates exponentially higher than 2%. And those loans were at least backed by actual physical real estate.
Right, there were actual houses attached to those loans.
Yeah. So how does a bank lend exclusively to the highest risk demographic and expect the lowest risk performance?
Well, if viewed strictly through the lens of Western algorithmic underwriting, it's a statistical impossibility. The math simply does not compute.
Okay.
The solution to that anomaly doesn't exist on a spreadsheet or in a risk pricing algorithm. It requires a completely different operational framework that substitutes local social structures for physical collateral. The primary mechanism for risk mitigation isn't financial, it's behavioral.
Behavioral. Okay, I want to get into that.
Yeah, but before we can examine the mechanics of how they secure the loans, we really have to address the liquidity problem.
Right. Because to test that operational framework at scale, they need immense amounts of capital. If a bank is mandated to grow its credit deployment by 10% annually, but lacks traditional high-margin profit streams to reinvest, where's the liquidity actually coming from?
Exactly.
The strategy maps out a very rigid, diversified funding formula to achieve this by 2030. They aim for 30% of the total capital sources to come directly from the state budget. And then another 30% is targeted to come from government-guaranteed bonds issued by the VBSP itself.
Let's actually break down the mechanics of a government-guaranteed bond in this context, because it's important.
Go for it.
Ordinarily, if an independent bank issues a bond to raise institutional capital, investors price that bond based on their trust in that specific bank's ability to repay the debt. So the higher the perceived risk, the higher the yield the bank must offer to attract buyers.
Makes sense.
But by attaching a sovereign government guarantee to the VBSP's bonds, the state is explicitly telling institutional investors, look, if the social policy bank fails to generate returns, the National Treasury will backstop and cover your investment.
Oh, wow. So there's basically zero risk for the investor.
Exactly. It artificially, but very effectively, lowers the borrowing cost. That allows the VBSP to raise massive amounts of institutional capital on the open market at highly favorable rates.
Okay, so that covers 60% of the funding structure, which is deeply intertwined with the national federal level. But then the directive outlines a mandate for local budget entrusted funds to hit 15% of total resources. This requires provincial and municipal governments to allocate a portion of their own localized tax revenue or budgets directly into the VBSP.
Which is, honestly, a brilliant mechanism for forcing fiscal alignment.
How so?
Well, When a local municipality is required to entrust its own capital into the social policy bank lending pool, it generates intense, localized oversight. The provincial leadership is suddenly highly motivated to ensure those loans are deployed effectively within their specific jurisdiction. They are no longer just administering a federal program, they are actively watching their own treasury.
Okay, let's dig into the bureaucratic reality of that for a second, though. Because if I am a provincial mayor, I am operating with a finite, tightly constrained budget.
Right.
Every single dong I am mandated to hand over to the VBSP is capital. I cannot spend on highly visible local priorities, like, fixing potholes, upgrading the power grid, or building a new health clinic.
Yeah.
It seems like this would create immediate, intense political friction between the central mandate and the local officials.
Oh, it undeniably forces difficult capital allocation choices at the municipal level, but the friction is a feature, not a bug. Yeah. It prevents the classic disconnect where local politicians view national social programs as just this bottomless well of federal money to be dispensed without consequence.
I see.
By demanding that 15% local contribution, the central government ensures that local officials have actual skin in the game. It incentivizes the local government to actively support the borrowers so the local funds aren't lost to default.
That makes a lot of sense. And then we hit what is arguably the most radical financial mechanism outlined in the entire document.
The 2% rule.
Yes, the 2% rule. Under the resource mobilization section, there's this highly specific legal requirement dictating that state credit institutions must maintain a 2% deposit balance of their mobilized funds in Vietnamese dong at the VBSP.
This is a structural cross-subsidy embedded directly into the national financial architecture.
Wait, if I am the CEO of a mainstream state-owned commercial bank, I am going to fight this tooth and nail.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I spend millions on marketing, branch infrastructure, and competitive interest rates to gather public deposits. And the moment those deposits hit my vault, the government legally siphons 2% of my hard-earned liquidity to fund a social project that is entirely outside my control. How does the state justify essentially taxing commercial bank deposits to fund high-risk, low-yield rural loans?
Well, from a purely commercial banking perspective, yeah, it is an infuriating drag on capital efficiency. But the state justifies it as a systemic macroeconomic stabilization cost.
Okay, unpack that.
The mainstream commercial banking sector, the entities issuing massive corporate loans, financing high-rises, managing wealthy portfolios, that sector thrives only when the overall macroeconomy is stable.
Right.
Severe rural poverty and underdevelopment create macroeconomic instability. It suppresses broader consumer markets and risks social friction. Therefore, the state views the commercial sector as a primary beneficiary of a stable society and legally mandates that they subsidize the development of the base.
So it is basically an automatic balancing mechanism. If the mainstream economy is booming and commercial banks are gathering massive amounts of deposits, the social safety net automatically receives a proportional injection of liquidity.
Exactly.
The expansion of the VBSP is hardwired to the success of the broader financial market.
It's brilliant because it insulates the VBSP from being entirely dependent on the whims of annual legislative budget battles. It guarantees a steady, legally mandated stream of liquidity constantly flowing from the top end of the financial spectrum to the bottom.
Wow.
Furthermore, the directive doesn't just treat the VBSP as a passive receptacle for funds. They are mandated to aggressively utilize the interbank market.
Right. Let's clarify how the interbank market functions for you listening. In standard finance, the interbank market is basically the plumbing of the system. It is where commercial banks lend money to each other, usually overnight or for very short terms, to meet central bank reserve requirements or just manage daily liquidity needs.
And integrating the VBSP into that daily lending ecosystem is highly significant. It means the social policy bank isn't operating as an isolated, siloed charity fund. It's an active, integrated participant in the daily flow of national liquidity.
So they can act like a regular bank in that sense?
Yes. If the VBSP has excess mobilized capital sitting idle, it can lend it to commercial banks on the interbank market to generate yield. And conversely, if it needs a sudden influx of short-term cash to fund a surge in agricultural loans before planting season, it can borrow from the commercial sector.
And around the funding, the strategy also tasks them with actively attracting voluntary deposits from organizations and individual citizens.
Yeah.
So they are trying to position the VBSP as a depository institution where private corporations or regular people can park their savings, essentially banking with them as a form of social contribution.
Which is a nice supplementary source. But having a legally mandated, deeply diversified pool of billions of dong is really only half the equation. You still have to execute the disbursement.
Which brings us back to the logistical nightmare of distribution. Moving massive amounts of capital from a digital ledger in Hanoi to a farmer's pocket in a remote mountainous province. And doing so without losing it to administrative friction, local corruption, or massive default. How are they physically executing this operation on the ground?
The architecture outlined in the strategy relies on something called commune transaction points. They completely abandoned the traditional concept of the permanent brick-and-mortar bank branch.
Interesting.
Think about it. A standard commercial bank builds a prominent building in a commercial district, staffs it full-time, and expects the customer to come to them. The VBSP operates in reverse.
So what does a commune transaction point actually look like in practice?
Yeah.
Because the commune is the fundamental administrative unit of local governance in Vietnam. From my understanding of the operational model this document supports, a mobile team of bank staff basically travels down to the local commune headquarters on a specific fixed date every single month.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
They literally set up folding tables, bring their secure ledgers and cash, and run a pop-up bank right there in the local community center for the day.
And that physical proximity is the crucial first layer of risk management. By operating at the commune level on a highly predictable, fixed schedule, the bank drastically reduces the transaction costs and transportation friction for the borrower.
Right, because distance is a huge barrier.
Exactly. If a rural borrower has to sacrifice a full day of labor, pay for a bus ticket, and travel to a regional city center just to make a small monthly interest payment, the probability of delinquency skyrockets simply due to logistical exhaustion.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So by bringing the bank directly into the commune, accessibility is maximized and the excuse of geographic distance is eliminated.
But showing up once a month with a cash box doesn't explain the 2% default rate we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The physical location is just the logistical delivery method. The true risk mitigation, and what the directive heavily emphasizes, is the human infrastructure they leverage.
Right, this is the core of it.
The document explicitly mandates the integration of socio-political organizations directly into the banking process. They specifically name the Fatherland Front, the Women's Union, the Farmers Union, and the Youth Union. So they don't rely solely on professional loan officers. They utilize deeply embedded savings and credit groups.
And this is exactly where the mystery of the 2% default rate is solved. In a traditional Western banking system, physical collateral guarantees the loan. If you fail to repay your mortgage, the bank legally seizes the house.
Simple as that.
In this operational model, social capital entirely replaces physical collateral. The leaders of these local unions and grassroots organizations are intimately embedded in the daily fabric of their specific communities. They possess hyper-local knowledge that no algorithm could ever capture.
They know everyone.
They know exactly which families have the work ethic to manage a loan, who is genuinely struggling due to illness, and whose livestock recently perished in a storm.
It is essentially an ultra-localized underwriting process based entirely on community reputation. Instead of a faceless risk assessment algorithm in a skyscraper 200 miles away scanning your credit history, your loan application is being facilitated, reviewed, and vouched for by the head of the local women's union or the commune chairman.
Yes.
It is being approved by people who know your family dynamics.
And critically, it's being monitored by people who see you every single day. The strategy document explicitly tasks these socio-political organizations with supervising and guiding the effective use of borrowed capital. They are not merely stamping an approval form, they are actively auditing the investment in real time.
Right. So if you borrow, say, 10 million dong explicitly earmarked for expanding your agricultural capacity, and 2 weeks later you are seen driving a brand new, expensive motorbike around the village, the local farmers union representative is going to immediately intervene and ask very pointed questions.
Exactly. The peer accountability engineered into this system is incredibly intense. If you default on your loan in this model, You are not just ignoring late payment letters from a faceless corporate entity, you are actively breaking a social contract with the neighbors who vouched for you.
Oof, yeah, that's heavy.
You are damaging the reputation of your local credit group, which could jeopardize future funding for the rest of your community.
So the stakes are way higher.
Oh, absolutely. The social friction of non-payment is astronomically higher than the legal friction of defaulting on a commercial credit card. That intense network of peer pressure and localized oversight is why the bad debt ratio remains miraculously low. The risk management is profoundly social.
And the document actually encodes this grassroots approach into a highly specific cultural mandate. I mean, government decrees are historically dry, dense, heavily bureaucratic texts. But this directive mandates that all bank operations must be guided by the philosophy of, quote, understanding the people's hearts, dedicated to serving.
It's beautiful language, honestly.
Finding deeply emotional, service-oriented language embedded right in the middle of a macroeconomic banking strategy is just wild. You would never find a mandate to understand people's hearts in a strategic blueprint for JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs.
Right, because in a traditional commercial bank, empathy is irrelevant to the algorithm.
Yeah.
In the VBSP system, empathy is a strict, functional, operational requirement.
How so?
Well, the entire peer accountability model relies on highly accurate, localized knowledge. If the bank staff and the commune leaders lack genuine, empathetic understanding of the specific, nuanced hardships faced by that particular village, the underwriting process collapses. They have to understand the reality of the borrower to accurately assess the risk and structure the support.
Okay, so they have engineered an incredibly effective, human-centric, localized operational model. It clearly functions well, given the massive reach and the incredibly low default rates. But this exposes a massive operational tension.
The scaling problem.
Yes. A banking system that relies heavily on local community leaders sitting in village halls, tracking payments on paper ledgers, and conducting face-to-face meetings is robust. But it creates a severe bottleneck for scalability. As the rest of the financial world digitizes and speeds up, this localized model risks becoming administratively paralyzed.
Absolutely.
And the strategy clearly recognizes this impending bottleneck because it outlines a massive mandate for comprehensive digitalization by 2025 and 2030.
Yeah, the directive really attempts to reconcile the deep empathy of grassroots banking with the ruthless efficiency of modern fintech. It explicitly instructs the VBSP to undergo a national digital transformation.
Right.
The mandate requires them to modernize their core banking systems, ensure rigorous network security, and develop diverse products that are modern, convenient, and easy to use.
Okay, I have to say, I am highly skeptical of this specific mandate.
Why is that?
Well, if your primary mandate is to serve the poorest households, including ethnic minorities living in deeply remote, mountainous areas, populations that very likely lack reliable broadband infrastructure or high-end smartphones, is pushing a sleek, consumer-facing mobile banking app actually useful?
You're wondering if it's performative.
Exactly. Or is this just a case of bureaucratic vanity? Is the government pushing tech for tech's sake just so the institution looks modernized on international paper while completely ignoring the reality of the end user?
That is a very valid critique. It's often referred to in developmental economics as techno-solutionism, this belief that just dropping an app into a complex social problem will magically fix it.
Right.
However, if we parse the text carefully, the digital push isn't necessarily focused on forcing every rural farmer to download a flashy front-end application. The digital transformation connects directly back to the document's emphasis on reducing input costs and improving labor productivity. The revolution they are mandating is primarily on the back end.
Meaning, they are focused on digitizing the administrative ledger, not necessarily changing how the farmer interacts with the commune transaction point.
Precisely. Look, processing a massive volume of microtransactions is incredibly expensive in terms of administrative overhead. If a commercial bank processes a $1 million corporate loan, the administrative cost is a tiny fraction of the generated interest.
Sure.
But if the VBSP processes a $50 agricultural loan using paper ledgers and manual data entry, the administrative cost easily exceeds the interest collected. The model bleeds capital through operational friction.
Oh, that makes sense.
So by modernizing the core banking systems and providing digital tools to the socio-political organizations to track disbursements, the VBSP drastically lowers its internal operational costs. That back-end efficiency is the exact mechanism that allows them to maintain structurally low interest rates for the borrower without going bankrupt.
Okay, I see. And the strategy also explicitly calls for the development of an IT system capable of providing, quote, early warning for potential risks. But how does a digital early warning system actually function when your primary risk factor isn't a sudden dip in corporate bond yields or a stock market crash, but rather a localized flood or a swine flu outbreak?
It functions through rapid, hyper-localized data aggregation.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine the entire network of thousands of commune transaction points feeding data into a modernized, centralized digital core. If that system suddenly detects a highly localized anomaly, for example, let's say a 15% spike in delayed interest payments originating from 3 specific contiguous communes within a single week.
Right.
That data point triggers an immediate algorithmic alert. It signals to the central office that there is likely an environmental, biological, or economic shock occurring in that precise geographic area long before the local news even reports it.
Wow. So it shifts the entire institution from a posture of reactive debt collection to proactive, targeted intervention. They can dispatch resources to that specific commune immediately.
Exactly.
And speaking of how the bank interacts with the borrower, the strategy outlines a fascinating shift in how they define preferential treatment over the coming decade. Historically, the entire draw of a social policy bank was simply cheap capital offering a dramatically lower interest rate than a commercial lender or local loan shark. But the directive indicates that the nature of their structural advantage needs to evolve.
Yes, the document clearly states that traditional preferential treatment, meaning subsidized interest rates, will gradually be replaced by or heavily supplemented with preferences in processes, procedures, and loan conditions.
Because for a borrower in an exceptionally difficult area, the bureaucratic friction of obtaining a loan, the endless forms, the required documentation, the lengthy waiting periods, is often a much higher barrier to entry than an extra percentage point of interest.
Absolutely. Time is money, even for subsistence farmers.
Right. A poor household doesn't have the time to navigate complex financial bureaucracy. By simplifying the paperwork, eliminating red tape, and crucially, increasing the amount of capital they are permitted to borrow entirely without collateral, the bank is providing a structural advantage that is arguably far more impactful than just offering cheap money.
But, executing this complex digital transformation while simultaneously maintaining the boots on the ground empathy required for the pure accountability model, it presents an incredibly steep human resources challenge.
I can imagine.
The directive directly addresses human capital, demanding that the VBSP recruit staff with high professional skills and strong professional ethics. And it specifically notes that these highly trained individuals must be willing to be arranged and placed in remote, mountainous areas and regions with large ethnic minority populations.
That is a staggering recruitment hurdle. You are essentially asking highly educated finance professionals, IT specialists, and systems architects to intentionally forego the lucrative salaries, career trajectories, and modern amenities of a corporate banking job in Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi.
Yeah, good luck with that. Right.
Right. Instead, you're asking them to relocate to deeply disadvantaged rural communes. The financial compensation will never be able to match the private sector. You are essentially trying to recruit people who possess the technical skill set of a Wall Street quant, but who are driven by the internal motivation of a Peace Corps volunteer.
Which is exactly why the emotional and cultural mandate we discussed earlier, understanding the people's hearts, is vital not just for the borrower, but for the staff. The institution must foster an intense culture of profound public service.
Otherwise, they just leave.
Exactly. If the staff do not view their work as a critical national mission, the bank will suffer massive brain drain to the commercial sector, and the digital transformation will fail due to a lack of competent execution at the local level.
Which leads us perfectly into the final major strategic pillar, because the strategy acknowledges a blunt, often painful reality about systemic poverty alleviation. Simply handing a vulnerable household a stack of cash without providing them the tools, the knowledge, or the structural environment to deploy it effectively is rarely helpful.
It's a recipe for disaster.
In many cases, it is actively destructive. It can easily trap an already vulnerable family in a cycle of unpayable debt, leaving them worse off than before the intervention.
This is a classic, well-documented failure mode in global microfinance. Raw credit injection without capacity building is not a panacea.
No.
If a rural household secures a loan to purchase specialized agricultural fertilizer but lacks the technical knowledge to apply it at the correct rates, or lacks access to a regional market to sell the increased crop yield, the capital is entirely wasted. The funds disappear into the ground and the debt remains on the ledger.
The strategy document's solution to this inherent danger is to demand total, holistic integration. It mandates that social policy credit must be deeply interwoven with broader national target programs, specifically highlighting poverty reduction initiatives, new rural development plans, and socioeconomic development in ethnic minority areas.
Yes.
They're essentially deploying a concept of knowledge as collateral. The VBSP is explicitly ordered to integrate its credit provision directly with state-run agricultural, forestry, and fishery extension programs.
This completely shifts the paradigm of the transaction. The moment a loan is dispersed to a farmer, it triggers a coordinated response from the local governmental apparatus to provide immediate technical support alongside the capital.
It's not just a transaction where the bank says, here are the funds to buy a new flock of chickens. Good luck. We'll see you next month for the interest payment.
Right. It's not hands-off.
It is a coordinated intervention. It's like, here are the funds for the chickens. Here is the regional agricultural extension officer who will visit your farm to teach you specific biosecurity protocols to prevent the spread of avian flu. And here is the contact information for the local state-backed cooperative that guarantees they will purchase your egg production at a fair, stabilized price.
They are actively engineering the entire economic ecosystem surrounding the borrower to maximize the probability of success. And the text proves that this is fundamentally a multidisciplinary effort.
Oh, definitely.
The directive specifically assigns coordinating roles to multiple high-level ministries: the Ministry of Labor, Invalids and Social Affairs, the Ministry of Planning and Investment, and the Ministry of Finance. It is a whole-of-government approach, utilizing the VBSP merely as the central financial engine for a much larger developmental machine.
But risk is an inescapable reality, especially in agriculture. Even with the best seeds, the most advanced biosecurity training, and the most robust local cooperatives, failure is inevitable.
It happens.
A typhoon destroys the harvest. A new strain of swine flu wipes out the livestock. A global supply chain disruption crashes the price of the cash crop. When a borrower inevitably fails to generate a return and cannot repay the loan, how does this institution handle the default? I scanned the document looking for the standard banking protocols regarding asset seizure, wage garnishment, or aggressive debt recovery tactics.
And what you found instead is a protocol that is entirely contrary to standard commercial recovery operations.
I found a section entirely focused on handling failure objectively. The document explicitly emphasizes dealing with risks, quote, objectively, accurately, and promptly. But the stated goal of dealing with those risks isn't to recover the bank's capital.
No, it's not about the money.
The stated goal is to help subjects overcome difficulties, restore production, create livelihoods, and stabilize their lives.
That single sentence is perhaps the most profound deviation from commercial banking in the entire strategic blueprint.
It's just wild.
In a traditional commercial framework, a defaulted loan is a financial loss that must be recovered through any legal leverage available in order to protect shareholder equity. The bank's primary relationship with the borrower becomes adversarial. But in the VBSP model, a localized default is treated as a socioeconomic symptom, not a personal criminal failing.
It's exactly like building a financial circuit breaker into the economy. Think about how a commercial bank operates. If a loan fails, the bank treats it like a short circuit. It aggressively cuts the power completely, seizes whatever collateral the farmer has left, liquidates it, and leaves the household economically destitute to protect the bank's bottom line.
Exactly.
The VBSP model operates differently. When the failure occurs, the system trips the breaker. They stop the accumulation of penalizing interest, they diagnose the cause of the surge, whether it was a flood or a market crash, and they work to slowly, methodically restore power so the whole house doesn't burn down.
The state deeply recognizes the concept of systemic risk. If a severe climate event devastates an entire commune's cash crop, aggressively calling in the loans and seizing local assets would trigger a cascade of secondary poverty.
Right, it would just make everything worse.
It would plunge the entire region into a catastrophic economic depression, which entirely counteracts the national mandate of maintaining social equity and stability. The institution is instructed to absorb the localized financial blow, stabilize the borrower's immediate living conditions, and restructure the debt to get them back to a place of productive economic capacity. It views the borrower as a citizen requiring structural support rather than a revenue stream to be squeezed.
So let's zoom out and synthesize this entire framework. We started this deep dive looking at what appeared to be a dense, incredibly dry, 12-page bureaucratic state decree. But as we peeled back the layers of Decision No. 05QD-GTG, We uncovered a remarkably sophisticated, highly orchestrated financial engine. We looked at a system that legally and systematically extracts liquidity from a thriving, high-margin commercial banking sector, funneling it directly and continuously into a national social safety net.
We examined an institution that completely abandons traditional physical collateral, relying instead on highly localized peer accountability and the deep social networks of commune-level unions to manage risk. And that results in repayment metrics that completely defy the expectations of Western financial models.
We dissected the inherent tension of modernizing a grassroots operation, the push to digitize the back-end ledger, to process millions of microtransactions efficiently, without losing the profound, face-to-face empathy required to operate successfully in deeply rural areas.
Yeah.
And we saw a structural mandate that refuses to deploy raw capital in isolation. It pairs every financial injection with the agricultural training and economic integration necessary to ensure that the capital actually generates a sustainable livelihood. It treats an inevitable default not as a breach of contract to be punished, but as an economic problem to be solved.
And, analyzing this blueprint leaves us with a truly fascinating provocation regarding the future of finance for you to think about. We currently exist in a global financial ecosystem that is utterly obsessed with algorithmic underwriting, high-frequency automated trading, and the relentless pursuit of the next billion-dollar fintech unicorn promising to violently disrupt the banking sector with a new mobile application.
Exactly. The classic Silicon Valley approach to finance, where the ultimate goal is frictionless transaction volume and massive venture capital returns.
Yet, reading through the operational reality of the VBSP suggests that perhaps the most radical, impactful financial innovation of our time isn't technological in nature at all. What if the true future of sustainable global financial inclusion looks less like a sleek, frictionless app engineered in a California office park and more like this blueprint? A legally mandated, decentralized, deeply community-integrated architecture where the fundamental metric of absolute success is the systematic elimination of poverty rather than the accumulation of profit.
It completely redefines the fundamental purpose of capital allocation. Remember the thought experiment we started with. The concept of a bank engineered backward, prioritizing the marginalized over the profit margin, choosing the hardest demographic instead of the easiest. It turns out it's not a hypothetical scenario discussed in economics classes. It is an active blueprint, currently operating in thousands of communes, mobilizing billions of dong, and aiming for unprecedented targets by the end of this decade. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll catch you on the next one.